Hello and welcome. This is time for another series of computer science lessons. We are going to be looking at C Sharp, and I'm going to do a handful of lessons here just to give you the kind of programming fundamentals of C Sharp. These are based on the resources I use for my A-level students, but they're appropriate to anybody who wants to just learn the basics of C Sharp. So this is lesson one, which is just an introduction, and I'll have some example programs for you to try at the end just to test your skills. So this series assumes you're using C Sharp through Microsoft's Visual Studio. You can download that at home. I think it's free for personal and educational use. So you can do a Google search and find Visual Studio and download it. You can use lots of programming languages through Visual Studio. We're going to be using C Sharp, obviously. A note, although Visual Studio allows you to easily create a graphical user interface for your programs, because we want to concentrate on programming fundamentals in these videos, we are going to be using text-based console apps so that we can concentrate on the coding fundamentals rather than worrying about all the visuals. So the visual side of things is great, but I'm not going to be taking you through it just now. It's just going to be the coding fundamentals. You can write simple programs with input and output using the console. You don't have to worry about any extra objects and controls. It's nice and simple. It's also really nice to use the console app when you want to test code without having to worry about all those extra user interface functions. When we're using the console for our input and output, just a few functions that we need to know. We've got console.write, which just lets us print characters on a line. We've got console.writeLine if you want to print some characters and then take a new line. If you want to get input from the user via the console, it's console.readLine. And we also have console.readKey, which allows the user to enter a single character. Console.readKey is quite important for us because when you're using the kind of built-in output window of Visual Studio, once it finishes running the program, Visual Studio just closes the window. So if you want it to stay open so you can see the last line of output or whatever, just include console.readKey at the end, and then the console won't close until you kind of press that key at the end. So if you've got Visual Studio, just go to create a new project, find the console app for C Sharp, because that's what we're going to be using. And when it comes up, Visual Studio will create a kind of skeleton framework of code for you. So for example, this line at the top here, that static void main string args, don't worry about that. That's just where we're going to start. And you just kind of write your code between those brackets, and then you can run the program. Just press F5 and off you go. But you can see here that we need that read key at the end here, just to make sure the program doesn't close automatically. Don't worry, I'll go through all the syntax and what more of this means as we go through this lesson. Okay guys, the basics still hold true. We've got variables in C# and we've got constants, and that's what we're going to be concentrating on today. So a variable, as we should know, it's a label used by a program to represent a value stored in a memory location that can change while the program is running. And a constant is very similar, except once you set a constant, it cannot be changed while the program is running, although obviously the programmer can still change it when they first create that constant. In C#, variables must be declared and initialized with a value before you can use them. We can declare them on one line and then initialize them on another, or we can do that in one line, just as we do with these two examples here. When you declare them, you have to give the data type. Some languages don't ask you to do that these days, but C#, you need to give a data type, in this case int for integer. Here is a list of some of the common data types. We've got int for 32-bit integers. We've got long for 64-bit integers, double for 64-bit floating point numbers, strings for our characters, bool for your boolean true or false values, and char just to store an individual character. There are lots more, but these are the kind of basic ones that you're going to use 99% of the time. Here are some examples of how we would write them. So you can see it's just the data type and then the name. And then if you want to set a value, you can do that by using the equals like you do in most programming languages. You can also declare multiple variables of the same data type in one line. You can also declare and initialize multiple variables of the same type in one line as well. Again, noting you have to separate them with commas, and obviously they've got to be the same data type. You can also ask the compiler to infer the data type instead of stating it explicitly. So here we're using var instead of a data type, and that will just get the computer to look at the data that we're storing and go, right, the first one is an integer, the second one is a double, and the third one is a string. I know a lot of my students just like to use var all the time. I generally don't use it too often. I like to be explicit with my data types just to make sure I have complete control of my programs, but it is an option. Obviously, when you are using var for your data type, you obviously have to set a value for it so the computer can then try and work out what the value is. Sometimes we want to change a value from one data type to another. This is what we call casting. You can have implicit or explicit casting in C#. Implicit is when converting from one data type to another does not involve any loss of accuracy. So in this example here, you can see we have an integer, and then we're going to cast that into a long. Obviously, with a long, we can easily store the value 7. We're not going to lose anything there, so I don't need to do any special method call or anything like that to convert it. The same here when we go from our integer 15 and cast that to a double. We're just going from 15 to 15.00. We're not losing any accuracy. I don't have to do anything special here. It just converts straight away. When there is a loss of accuracy, we may need to cast explicitly. So obviously going from a double to an integer, you're going to lose that fractional part. That 0.67 is going to be lost. So we're going to just be explicit. There's some different conversion methods that we can use. We're just going to use the most basic one here, which is just in brackets saying int. And that will end up with int cost being equal to 15. We will lose the fractional part. It'll just get chopped off. To cast from strings, text, to numbers, there's a range of methods here. So I'm just using the most kind of basic casting method here. So to cast my text to a 32-bit integer, I'm using int32.parse. To cast my larger number to a long, I'm using int64.parse because I want it to be a 64-bit value. And for my fractional number, I'm using double.parse because I want it to be a double accuracy floating point. And this is very, very kind of simple casting. There are lots of ways to use casting conversion in C#. We've got a couple examples here, like convert dot methods, like convert dot to int32. That's a bit more advanced. That will convert anything to a 32-bit integer, not just a string. We also have int32.tryparse, which is a bit of error handling automatically if it generates any errors. I'm just generally going to use the most basic method in my examples, but there are more elaborate versions that you can use in your programs if you want to. That's no problem. You can obviously do a bit of a Google search and find out more information about those. To convert from numeric data to text, we can use dot to string, like in this example. Obviously, if we just want to print text out, we don't actually need to use toString to convert it. I could just say console.writeLine num a, it would print fine. Generally, when we convert something to a string, it's because we want to do a bit more manipulation with it, and we'll look at kind of string manipulation more in a further lesson. I just want to kind of present that to you just now, so you've got everything to start with. We can obviously use constants with C#. A lot of my students come from a Python background. Python doesn't have constants at the moment. C# does. A constant is similar to a variable, but it cannot be changed after you set it. So here, VAT, I'm setting as a const double, a constant. So that means elsewhere in my program, I cannot set VAT to any other value. If I have a line like VAT equals 0.3, that will generate a compiler error. VAT is an excellent thing to set as a constant because it's not going to be changed while the program is running. So I can set it as a programmer and I don't have to worry about accidentally editing or changing it later on. Arithmetic operators are very similar to what you will see in most languages. Just a couple of notes I want to go through here. So you can see here I'm doing a division. Because num1 and num2 are both integers, doing the division automatically will give us the answer 3, not 3.5. If you divide one number by another, it basically does floor division for you automatically. It will get rid of any fractional part and then just store it as an integer. If you want to get the fractional part, then obviously you need to be dividing two numbers that have fractions. In that case, we will get the 3.5. If you want to use modulus, You can just use the percentage sign. It's the same in Python, for example, and that just divides two numbers and keeps the remainder. If you want to do one number to the power of another, we use the math library, and then we use the .pow function here, and that just takes two numbers and gives you one number to the power of the second number. So in this case, that would be 7 to the power of 2, 7 squared, which obviously gives you 49. We have some arithmetic shortcuts you can use, many of which you should be familiar with from other languages. And you'll see me using these from time to time, so that's just what they mean if you're not too familiar with them. Increment just means add by 1, and decrement just means decrease by 1, if you're not familiar with those terms. We can also have comments when you want to add a little bit of extra information to your program just to explain what it means, and we just use a double slash for that in C#. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a set of programming activities, and then at the end of the video I will go through the solution. I'll just put it up. I probably won't explain them too much, just might point out one or two things, but we have a whole set of programming activities that you can have a go at and then check out the solution. So this is the first 3. We have another couple here for you to take a look at. So have a look at all those 6. Have a go at programming them, pause the video, and then come back to it after you've done each one, and I'll just put the solution up just now. Alright, hopefully you've programmed them all. These are the solutions. These are not the only way that you can code them, and not necessarily the shortest version, the most efficient version, just basic solutions for you to take a look at. If you've done it differently, that is fine as long as it works. So nothing much to do here. It's just making sure that you obviously take the input and then convert it to a number format, in this case using int32.parse or another casting method. Solution number 2, again, very similar. Hopefully just a little bit of practice there for you. Solution number 3, again, hopefully just a little bit of practice. Number 4, using math.pow and then obviously converting that to an integer at the end for the program. Using the math.square-root function there. And number 6, making sure you use your division and your modulus in the correct way. If you're doing this as a GCSE or A-level student, being able to use floor division and modulus is really important to help access those higher grades. Okay, hopefully that was useful to you. We'll be back in a week or two with another lesson, and we'll just keep working our way through the basic programming fundamentals, but using C#. Good luck with your studies, everyone.